Welcome to the Sports Trading Card Hall of Fame. Today I'm going to be doing the preview for the various topics of Chapter 12, where I'm going to be inducting borderless cards, or really just the image bleeding off of cards. I'm going to be inducting that into the Binder of Fame. I'm also going to be talking about the 1990 Upper Deck Reggie Jackson autograph. But first I want to kick it off by talking about a story of cardboard about the American Card Catalog, which is the single most important published document for sports cards. And that's really because it is what started card collecting. It's the foundation of card collecting because it is the first case where there's a complete catalog explaining about all, or at least as far as they knew at the time, all sports cards that had been created over the years, but also it helped to catalog them. There are certain sets like T206, for example, that are referenced as such simply because that's the way that they were categorized in this document. And I will note that the American Card Catalog is not the original name. I'm not going to bother with the original name here in this discussion because I don't want to convolute things. It's the more common name, so that's what I'm going to be going with. But it was a booklet that was created early in the 20th century by a very avid card collector who, well, just by card collector, I mean not just sports cards. I mean, this is a book that actually does include other cards from the era as well, not just sports, but it's the core of the sports card community. And it was a collector who'd been gathering this over the years and trying to make sense of all of this by himself, for the most part. Now, with me with the Sports Card Professor project, I have a lot of respect for people trying to gather all this information, pull it together, because I already have the foundation of the Beckett annuals that I use as the core for my own work, and then I have to add on to that as I can discover information. And so that means that I've got to be paying attention, and in all of this work I have gained more respect for Dr. James Beckett and his group, and for other teams who have put together catalogs like the Standard Catalog of Baseball Cards. And both of those are offshoots of the ACC, the American Card Catalog. So when I look at what these teams have put together and I look at the work that I've been doing, I am blown away by the work that they've done already, what they've put together over the years, but especially when you get into the pre-war world, because that's the world where Jefferson Burdick was building this catalog. And the ability to find where everything came from and find all the different versions in a time where there wasn't a card collecting world, there wasn't a card collecting community, is pretty astonishing. Not just that he did it, but also the fact that he put it together in a booklet that he then got published, not in the millions or even in the thousands. It was printed in the hundreds and then revised over time, so we got more and more copies of it that got better over time. But this was not a major document. This was something for those few people who were in the card collecting world at the time. And it was, again, it became the foundation for what would come later as the card collecting community got a lot bigger and a lot more sustainable. The fact that we had something like this from the past was immeasurable. But I mentioned that it is the reason, or it is what started card collecting. And the reason I say that is because card collecting is, there's a lot of confusion about it, but card collecting itself, it involves not necessarily checklists specifically, but it involves a type of pursuit where checklists can be involved because there's a structure to it. If you're not building together something that has some sort of a theme or a path, then you're just amassing cards, which is a collection in a very basic sense. But collecting is about pursuit. It's about trying to find certain things and get them and put them together. Now, you could be a completist putting together a card set, in which case you've got the checklist, you're trying to put that together. You could be a team collector where you're trying to get all of the different cards for your team and all of the different releases that exist, or you can narrow that down to players. But you can also do, say, all the rookie cards for Hall of Famers, or get autographs of all the Hall of Famers. And so there are different ways that you can collect cards, but collecting is about having a structured environment where you're trying to fill in all the gaps that exist, but it's about a structure where there are gaps that are built into it. And in order to be able to do that, you have to know what the gaps are. You have to know the parameters. You have to know what to anticipate and how to tell the difference between this and that and the other, and also to understand the rules of what is a card, what's not a card. All of that had to come from somewhere, and that's really what the ACC, what the American Card Catalog, what it did for card collecting was it laid that out. It gave us a roadmap. It gave us a structure. And from that, we could then expand out in terms of our own collections, but it also meant that we were able to expand out our knowledge of what existed, add on to it, grow the catalog, find things that were missed, that were misunderstood, and better refine the information that was in it. And so we were able to evolve sports cards, sports card collecting, the understanding about sports cards, all of that we were able to evolve because we had a starting point. And so if there's any document that is critical, it's the one that is the source material from which everything else came. And we would get the standard catalog, and we would get the Beckett annuals, and we would get these really great editions down the road that provided us with some more knowledge. Also, it gave us the convenience of understanding the variable price differences between different items to understand how much people pursue certain parts of the card collecting world, which does help to orient ourselves as to what expectations we have about the things that we're pursuing. All of this is very critical. But for those of us who were a part of the junk wax era, it's easy to take this for granted because we grew up in a world where not only did we have Beckett annuals, but we had Beckett monthly magazines as well. And we had a world where there were checklists originally with every single card set, and then that dwindled because we didn't need it because of the various publications. But we also grew up in a world where there was a well-defined environment where we understood what constituted something we cared about versus something that was a novelty versus something that was a trivial little a thing we could include in our card collection if we cared to, like promo cards for non-existent card companies. And so all of that structure came out of the ACC. But for the vintage guys, the ACC was really critical because it was such a chaotic mess in the pre-war era. I mean, this is a document created before Gaudi. And that's well before Play Ball and Bowman and Topps and Leaf kicked off the new era of card collecting, which was built on consistency. In the era before consistency, how in the world do you find your way around? And thankfully, there was a person who was around roughly during that time who was able to take advantage of when he was there and pull together something that we're so glad that he did at the time that he did it. So it's definitely one of the most important subjects for the Sports Trading Card Hall of Fame. And frankly, I'm surprised I haven't already talked about it and then moved it up to the Binder of Fame. That'll be happening pretty soon, but not quite yet. But the second story of cardboard I wanted to talk about is the 1990 Upper Deck Reggie Jackson autograph card. This is a card that is overrated. And by overrated, I mean that we have a simplified story about this and some other parts of the card collecting world at the time, where this is discussed as the first chase card and the first impact autograph. And for some people, it is the first serial numbered card as well. Now, all of that is not likely. It's all, maybe the serial numbering of cards, but the other things, not entirely, because, I mean, in 1989, we already had the Billy Ripken card that was the air card that was definitely chased after. You could also claim that there are a lot of people who talk about the Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card in Upper Deck as being one that was chased after as well. Now, they were not, if they were chase cards, they weren't chased after at the level of the Reggie Jackson card. And that's the big difference when it comes to chase cards, is that there had been chase cards before. Don Mattingly's rookie card, people tore through packs to try to get those. But the difference with the Reggie Jackson autograph is that Reggie, that was an impossible card to pull from a pack. you had to buy not just boxes, you had to buy cases, like tens of cases, to just have a chance at pulling one out of a pack. It was incredibly rare because of the overproduction at that time meant that even a card where there are 2,500 copies of it, well, there were millions of copies of all of the normal cards in packs, so good luck finding that one copy out of all of those. It was truly an impossible undertaking, but people did tear through packs to try to get them. And yes, at a higher rate than they did Griffey and Billy Ripken in the previous year. Now, the release of that was very close to when Pro Set released Series 1, which had the Pro Set hologram, which was another chase card that was also serial numbered. So those two are kind of a 1A and 1B. But still, it's a matter of the scale of both the hologram and the Reggie Auto. The scale of that and the difficulty in pulling it out of packs, that is the reason that the Reggie is usually considered to be the first true chase card. But it did take advantage of the fact that in 1989/90, there had been a Santa Claus card that had been sent out to dealers that became a different kind of chase card where people were hunting around to find one for sale. And that definitely laid the foundation for the Reggie Auto. Now, the other thing is about the first autograph card in pack. I don't believe that was the case. But really, at the end of the day, what's really important about whether it's the first or not the first is the impact that it has. Because you can be the first of something, but if nobody knows or if nobody cares, then what does it really matter? It's great that you did it, but unless you have some sort of a following and some sort of an influence, you're not the first. You just happen to have done it before anybody else. And this is where the Reggie Jackson autograph card becomes kind of tricky because, yes, the Reggie Jackson autograph is an absolutely earth-shatteringly important card for baseball card collectors. But outside of baseball, it didn't carry nearly as much weight. Now, it's a ridiculous thing to say this because in 1988, there was almost entirely just baseball card collectors. In 1989, we were starting to see a major uptick in football collecting, and basketball collecting was starting to get a bit of an uptick. Hockey was still at its own rhythm, but in 1990, football was now starting to launch forward and become its own unique part of the market. Basketball was taking off like a rocket. Now understand, it was still at the launch pad. The rockets were fully blasting, and it was just starting to shear off the mounting screws. So it was still waiting to leave the launch station and get out into open air and catch some speed. But it was doing that, and by mid-decade, it would be well clear and flying along at a rapid pace. But basketball was just starting to pick up. Hockey was picking up a bit as well. So in 1990, it was still the baseball card market with some other stuff going on. And because cards at the time were about sports, something I'm going to be getting back to shortly, that meant that, well, we didn't usually collect much outside of whatever sport we were into. So baseball card collectors didn't care about hockey, didn't care about basketball, didn't really care about football. So if something happened in another sport, baseball collectors didn't care. So when something happened, like say in 1991, Stadium Club launches with no border, and baseball collectors it blew them away. They didn't know that you could do that, and they thought that that was the beginning of something that had actually started the year before in football. So in football, when we saw Stadium Club, it was, oh good, it's a shiny version of what we were already familiar with. And it had some gold foil, which was cool, and we were excited about it, but we weren't so excited about the full bleed as much as we were excited about how fancy the card was in terms of the manufacturing. In baseball, they thought that was day one of borderless cards. That kind of a tradition is a big part of the story of sports cards. Most people were baseball card collectors. So that means that when they pulled a card, or when they discovered the Reggie Jackson autograph, to them that was the only autograph that was available in packs. And that would be the same case until in 1992, I believe it was the first time that somebody other than Upper Deck included autographs in packs. In baseball, again, I believe that's the case. I need to go back and double check. So for a baseball card collector, that's the way that they saw it. And since that was the engine driving the entire hobby, that became the storyline and the point of emphasis. But well, what about over in basketball, which is probably where impact autographs started? Did that have an impact on the hobby? Yes. Oh, heck yes. I believe, and I'm just going to put this right out there, that this is my belief, that that was what drove Pro Line to put autographs in every single pack over in football. Again, over in baseball, they didn't even know that Pro Line was putting autographs in every single pack in 1991. But in football, we knew about that. That's a different storyline because that's the storyline of the hobby. So I want to get more into talking about the quirky quality of the importance of the Reggie Jackson autograph in the standalone video, which I'll be doing later on. I'm going to leave this here as kind of the setup for it, which will be more than enough of a setup. But I'm going to move on to the last case, which is to talk about which is to officially, well, sort of officially. I guess this is like the announcement for the nomination to the Binder of Fame of borderless cards. And we've already been talking about Stadium Club, so that's interesting because of the fact that Stadium Club was step 2 of borderless cards. When borderless cards started in 1990 with Pro Set, it was not the first time that this had been done. I mean, for crying out loud, Exhibit is borderless cards. And Topps in the 1980s had been selling glossy card sets that were borderless as well. The reason that the 1990 Pro Set cards with 2 borders missing was so important was because it's easy to make something that's borderless if you're willing to spend the time to manufacture it, because you got to make multiple cuts. It's kind of like making a sandwich and then cutting the crust off of the bread. If you don't cut the crust off of the bread, you save yourself some extra work. But if you cut the crust off of the bread, it takes extra time. And that's the thing. In manufacturing, cards were for kids, absolutely for kids. And so when you go in and you cut off extra pieces in order to allow for one image to flow off, and then the card that was originally next to it also flow off of that side, and you don't have any mess between the two, that is unnecessary labor that drags down the process, brings up the cost, and card collecting was about churning out as much stuff as you can and printing money. So when ProSet went in and said, no, we're going to do that without giving you the price of an upper deck pack, it revolutionized sports cards due to the fact that it now provided collectors with a super rare, exciting part of their card collection that didn't require any extra money. That meant, though, that a card company had to invest in providing that, which was a sticky subject, and it would take a while until other card companies started to embrace it. 1991, we already had a decent uptick with Stadium Club, with Pro Line. Obviously, ProSet had Platinum out there as well. Action Pact was doing it, but they'd done it in 1990 alongside ProSet, so that doesn't really count. You also have Ultra. But outside of those, you don't have hardly anything else. Score had a couple of cards that they inserted into packs that were part of a subset, but really, it was a slow pickup that by 1994 became an industry-wide tradition. And in fact, by 1994, you started to realize that other than Score and Topps, which never got rid of their borders, everybody else got rid of their borders at some point. But by the end of the decade, that was reining back in. And in the new millennium, actually borders were so consistent that most new millennium cards have them, or they have a backdrop. Either way, it's fascinating to look at how borderless cards took over sports card collecting in the 90s and then largely disappeared. But a big part of the reason for that is because in the 80s and 90s, sports cards were about sports. They were an extension of sports. And when you get rid of the border, what you do is you bring yourself into the action, or you bring the viewer into the action, because now there is no, when the image runs off, you feel like you're in that space. And so for a fan, that is the best thing you can possibly have, because it makes all of the action on the card more vivid. But in the new millennium, sports cards are not about sports anymore. They're about icons, they're about legends, they're about heroes, they're about individuals, and the sport is incidental. I mean, for crying out loud, how common is it to get a sports card now that doesn't even have a team logo on it? In the 90s, we considered that to be a mark of being cheap, pointless, useless, something we didn't care about. But in the new millennium, it doesn't matter because it's not the sport that we're into. So where I would look at a 1996 Emmitt Smith card that doesn't have the logo on the helmet and go, it's not worth my time. Nowadays, a lot of card collectors wouldn't even notice that the logo wasn't there because that's not the point. And so when you're not interested in the game itself, then you don't need to have these glorious action shots that bring you into the arena, bring you into the stadium. So borderless cards had a specific time where they were really important, but they were truly fundamental to the growth of sports cards in the 1990s as we were getting more engaged into the potential that cards had to entertain us, to grab our eye, to tell a story. It was a great time. Again, I'm going to look at this in the standalone video, so that'll be coming up in probably a couple of weeks. So definitely look out for that. But those are the three topics that I'm looking at here in Chapter 12, the second week of this series, or this season of the Sports Trading Card Hall of Fame. So do look out for those videos that come up. Thank you very much for for keeping up with the video all the way through to here. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so. And thank you very much for watching.